Hello and welcome to the Mobile GameDev Playbook. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. This is a podcast all about what makes a great mobile game, what is and isn't working for mobile game designers, and all of the latest trends. I'm your host, John Jordan, and joining me today, we have two experts, of course. First expert up is Sergey Neskin. How's it going, Sergey?
Good. Glad to be there
today.
Good.
And you are the CEO and co-founder of Neskin Games. If you work out the relationship between Neskin Games and Sergey, you're doing well. And also joining us, no introduction required, Kalle Heikkinen, senior market analyst at GameRefinery by Liftoff. How's it going, Kalle?
Very good, very good. We had the first snow here in Helsinki yesterday, so it's really wintry and setting up the scene for Christmas.
I was going to say, I was in Helsinki last week, and it was just getting a bit of snow, but not quite settling. So I'm glad winter has come finally. Okay, so in this episode we are going to be talking about Sergey's game EverMerge, and it's sort of interesting because over the podcast over the last sort of few months we've spoken with Kalle and other experts about sort of the merge mechanic and how sort of important it's become generally in sort of the casual mobile game market. So this is an opportunity to look at some of those trends again, but also Sergey's going to give us some real in-depth information about how you design those games and how he's designed his game, and so we can go into a bit more detail. So that's the plan today. So before we get started, Sergey, do you want to give us an introduction to yourself and the company, and kind of fill out a bit of background for us?
Sure. I started my career as a software developer, created websites, web services, some business applications, and during the last 2 years of my development career, I worked for an outsourcing company. There is nothing wrong with being just a developer in an outsourcing company, but I've been dreaming about making my own products and doing something for self-realization. And game dev industry was really attractive in terms of creativity and self-realization. So I decided to attend first game dev conference in my life in Minsk, and felt all these vibes. That was amazing to see people like me, people who wanted to entertain other people, and that's where I met my partners Wal and Alexei, and in 2011 we founded a company called Neskin Soft, and later we reincorporated this company as Neskin Games. I've been working in merge genre all the time for longer than a decade, and EverMerge is the latest game we released.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about EverMerge. So official title is EverMerge Merge 3 Puzzle. So obviously you made a whole bunch of games. What was the idea to do a merge game? And did you just sort of have an idea you wanted to do merge games, or did you have a very specific vision for what you exactly wanted to do in a merge game?
We've been in merge games from 2011, so we've got lots of insights. We did lots of experiments, and we've learned well what works, what doesn't, what real audience wants to see in the game. And we released about 14 products. Almost half of them were about merge games. So it's the idea is the game design is the set of solutions that we wanted to try. We didn't have any particular idea, like we want to create a merge game with fairy tale creatures and so on. It was a little bit different. As a game designer, you feel like there is a potential, there is a scope of thoughts, things that you want to implement, and that's how we created EverMerge.
Good. We're going to get in a bit more detail, but before we get into that, Kalle, do you want to give us a bit of a sort of a high-level view of what's been going on in the sort of the decade in which sort of merge as a sort of a subgenre has been emerging?
Yeah, for sure. So there's actually three things that I'd like to highlight here. So first is the trend for, let's say, more narrative-focused merge games. So I think two good examples of that are Gossip Harbor and Love and Pies, which have especially recently risen in the ranks. So obviously we've seen some merge games experiment with narrative in the past as well, but not like, for example, these games have been doing. And I'm not only talking about the quality of not only talking about the amount of quality, but quality of as well. So for these games, the narrative beats are actually an obvious retention mechanic, as well as players really want to know how the story and the characters develop in these games. And then the second one is that compared to many other genres in the market currently, The merge genre is actually relatively active space. So there's lots of new games coming in, and while overall in the market it has been a little bit difficult to scale new games, merge seems to be a bit of an exception to this. So, for example, if we look at the top 10 merge games, all the top 10 merge games except Merge Dragons and actually EverMerge have been released in the last 2 years, and 6 out of the 10 top 10 merge games have been released in the last 18 months. So there's quite a lot of new entrants to the scene. And then the third thing that I would highlight is that we see merge as a mechanic used more and more outside merge games as well. So it's used in the product side, it's used in the user acquisition activities, and so on. So just some examples include, for example, we have a slots game, very successful slots game, Cash Tornado Slots, that has some merge elements in one of its recurring events. Obviously, Top Wars, Forex strategy game that utilizes merge. Gardenscapes just recently added a merge event. We see merge in Tower D events, in Idlers. Golden Goblins, for example, is a successful Idler merge game. So that's been interesting to follow as well. Not only the sort of like I'm all about merge games, but also other games that are just utilizing this mechanic in events and other features.
Now, I guess it sort of very much followed the trajectory of sort of match as a sort of a gameplay, or a mechanic that people really very easily understand and sort of really seem to just like doing repetitively.
Yeah, it's very accessible. Very accessible. Like you pick up a merge game or a merge, play the merge feature in a game, whatever game that is. It like literally takes you like 5 seconds to figure out that how does this mechanic work.
Sergey, so you have this company who I guess by this stage are sort of experts in merge. You've made some mistakes, seen some successes. So with EverMerge, how did you sort of filter those previous experiences to sort of come up with your sort of best idea of what was going to work? Can you talk us a little bit about that process of how you have all these possibilities you could do? How do you end up with the first sort of stab at the product that you go into soft launch with?
For us, it was a next step in our long journey in merge genre. And we just step by step moved forward to the game EverMerge. We wanted to reinforce exploration aspect in the game from the beginning. So it was something we experimented a little bit in our previous games called Gemcrafter, Robin Hood Legends. So we split the gameplay into levels, tried to monetize this game with out of moves like in classic match 3 games. This didn't work well, but we felt like players love moving forward, opening new levels and so on. And then we thought, well, what if we'll provide a player with the ability to unlock a fog, and there is some mystery going on under this fog and so on. And it was the concept of a single game board where a player has some freedom to move forward. Of course, the game is linear, but we wanted to experiment in this direction, and we didn't know if it will work or not. We saw Merge Dragons on the market out there, and it was a good example that it works, but we had to convince our partners as well, like, do we want to put time into this or not? And I'm glad that we did this.
Kalle was talking about narrative being a theme. Did you have a lot of narrative in there, or was exploration? Should we think of that as different to narrative? Because I guess they could be the same thing, or they may not be.
Well, it was not our main focus, so we tried to keep narrative as simple as possible. But I saw lots of examples. So some other games do this well, and that's why they resonate with the audience well.
I guess the problem with narrative is it's quite expensive on the content creation side, because you're having to create a lot of specific content, whereas exploration is a bit more, depending on how you structure it, can be a bit more open, that you don't sort of end up having to have a lot of artists just churning out this long narrative.
Adds additional level of complexity to the game that you need to keep in mind all the time. It increases cost of content production and so on. So in our game, it's simplified, but in our game, you could find well-known fairy tale characters, right? And this works exactly as a good IP, but in our case, we just use folklore, right? So we use things that everybody know well from the childhood, and this was a good thing as well. So we combined this with exploration, with known characters, and we didn't need to put a lot of work into the narrative.
Using fairy tales is sort of established IP, but you don't have to pay a license because it's sort of it's sort of just like almost like open source IP.
You need to be very careful though, because some Disney movies and so on, they have their own interpretation of IP. And if you want to draw Sleeping Beauty or other characters, be careful with this, because yes, it's IP that we know that comes from fairy tale, right? But be careful. And we did special legal checks with our partners. I appreciate they helped with this to manage.
Just to add to that, to the narrative stuff, it might also be that having a heavy narrative focus might actually work a little bit better in these Merge 2 games. So like Merge Mansion, for example, where it's just, it feels natural that, after a task, I'm not, Merge Mansion specifically doesn't actually do very heavy focus on the narrative actually. But anyway, like Gossip Harbor, for example, which Merge 2 game does it, and it feels natural that after you complete a certain task, you just have that narrative beat. Whereas in Merge 3 games like EverMerge, for example, as they are a bit more open-ended and it's more about the exploration, maybe the narrative isn't the thing that you can fit into the pacing and to the core loop as well as in Merge 2 games. I might be wrong in this, but it's just something that comes to my mind.
We've sort of gone through a little bit of the genesis of the project and you guys as a company and you how you sort of chosen your sort of kind of thematic fairy tales exploration. But then that's a sort of a good overview. But then when you start to sort of drill in a bit more, obviously the gameplay is about merging, but then when you're thinking about sort of progression and those sort of more, I guess, sort of mechanical gameplay elements, and then obviously that feeds into the sort of the more meta structure. Can you talk a little bit about how you sort of came up with the product from that point of view? Because obviously you have a gameplay thing where people are merging stuff and they're getting new elements, and that's really cool. How are you keeping people in there for a week, for a month?
First part here is that the merge gameplay is good at entertaining players and retaining them. So the gameplay itself is addictive. It provides you with enough goals, so you don't need, if you know how to make a first merge, you know what's next. And first our games that we released in 2011, 2012, they were really simple, just game board, merge gameplay, and all you have to do is just to merge, and it worked. So just pure concept of merge game works well, but on top of this, you add exploration, you add daily objectives, quests, you add additional goals, and then you get the game where you have a variety of things to do, and you have a variety of things to play in, and then on top of this, you add events and all these activities that you can find in EverMerge. And in this case, you get EverMerge. So this game gives you lots of goals, lots of directions to progress in. You have enough freedom, but it's linear enough to not get lost in this. And this works. If we will look at the first experiments with EverMerge, I don't think any human being would enjoy playing any of our early prototypes. It was a game board separated in two areas. So the left area was supposed to provide player with farm merge gameplay, where you merge carrots, crops, and so on. And second part was about city building aspect. And players were so addicted to the merge gameplay, they ignored anything else. So we had to find out ways how to force player to leave merge gameplay and go to the city builder aspect. And it was a nightmare, because if you as a game designer doing something like this, stop, and then like maybe you're doing something wrong. And that was the moment when we decided, no, we need to have everything in one place, and provide player with city building aspect and merging pieces in one single game board.
Can you talk a bit about your audience? Because I guess for people sort of developing and running games, there's lots of things you can do. and do some of those things really well in terms of game design. But often once your game is launched and you sort of have an audience, it's very hard to then shift that audience around, because those are the sort of people who've chosen you and they really like what you're doing, and you sort of have to give them more of what they want rather than some clever idea that your game designer wants to give them. So can you talk a little bit about, your audience and how you've sort of worked out who they are?
Appearance of the game is important, and it works as a funnel for audience, of course. And we saw many male who's playing our game. He complains like, I love it, but I'm not sure what's so is it okay, because it's a game designed for little princesses, and so on. So yeah, we have some limitations. I refer to them as to DNA of the product. Some game design decisions, some visuals are like, they put restrictions on what we can do in future, of course, and we have freedom with new products, right? So we will be able to cover more people, more male audience, and so on in future. But right now, yeah, the focus is clearly on female audience, and we work with them.
Because you'd made a lot of merge games before, that wasn't really a surprise to you that sort of casual audience is likely to be predominantly female.
That's what we saw in our previous game and Robin Hood Legends as well. We came up with Robin Hood as a woman, and she is going with her adventures against sheriff and so on. And yeah, that's what we saw in Robin Hood Legends and games we released previously. But that's because there is something from Match 3 games and hidden object games, because in merge game you have to find two similar objects. That's part of hidden games, and then you have to collapse them. It's part from Match 3, and these games were again targeted on female audience.
Kalle, have we got any sort of examples of merge being used in a more sort of predominantly male audience? Is there anything that sort of comes to mind?
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to my mind is definitely the example I already mentioned, which is the Top War example. For those of you who don't know, Top War is a 4X strategy game, but it also has incorporated some merge elements where you merge, for example, certain troops together, and then you create something new. And Top War also uses that as a mechanic in their user acquisition activities. So if you've seen some Top War ads, chances are that you have also seen some merge elements in them. And obviously, like post IDFA, all the titles, especially for example in 4X strategy base, are thinking about how to enlarge their audiences and stuff like that, and then using various different kinds of UA assets to maybe introduce new types of players to the gamer base is something that these games do, and at least we've seen Top War doing that. So that's been really, really interesting to see.
But that would be sort of somewhat of an outlier in the sense that we're not seeing sort of at the moment at least widespread adoption of merge.
That's very much true. Another genre where it's maybe a little bit, well, not dominant, but we're seeing there's a sort of like a sub genre in tower defense, where games like, I think Rush Royale is using it it's actually a pretty major role in that game. So the entire gameplay is based around merging things and then using that in PvP core gameplay.
That sort of makes sense, because in tower defense you're sort of leveling up as you go along. So you can imagine the sort of the merge bit being taking the instead of leveling up, you sort of merge up, so it sort of fits into the flow that's already existing there. But
that's true. Yeah.
Maybe an opportunity that maybe we'll be seeing in future podcasts. We'll be talking about the explosion of merge in hardcore or midcore. Anyway, okay. So Sergey, let's focus a bit now. We've sort of gone through the process, and you sort of taken us through, I guess, some of the design sort of considerations. Obviously, something like soft launch is something that's sort of key to mobile games, and one of the reasons mobile games I think have got so big is they have this period of time where they can put out a product in certain territories and sort of gain this sort of audience feedback, and then use that to iterate and maybe just hone the product, or maybe come up with something quite a bit different. So how was the soft launch a big thing for you guys, or because you were experienced, you sort of knew what to expect, or did it throw up any sort of surprises?
When we released the game in soft launch, we saw great metrics, and it proved that our hypothesis worked. But along with this kind of success came responsibility, because we knew that players, especially who are paying aggressively in the game, will be progressing through the content really fast. And we had really limited time to come up with the right event types for the game. Then we had limited time to test different A/B tests, an example, game economy, some features, because we came up with numbers, but we were not sure if these numbers are right or not. And some tests took about 2 or 3 months to see results and then be able to fix this. So we worked in constant rush to be able to release the game in November. This didn't happen. I really appreciate Chris Mencken. He was a producer of this game and helped me a lot to navigate some challenges. And it was his advice, like, not to release the game now, let's release it in May, because we'll have more events, more features, more content. Yeah, so we experimented, we developed new features, we experimented with existing, tested, and so on, like any other company, but we felt like there is something big and we didn't want to fail.
So sort of an extra 6 months of sort of development was fairly sort of significant extension of sort of budget and everything. But clearly, it's one of those cliches that you know, a bad game's always a bad game, but a late game's only late, you know, for a short period of time. That's the sort of the trade-off. If you think you've got something that's really doing well, then you need to spend the time to invest in the processes that you need to, you know, fulfill that.
You have no right to fail. You need to support. You need to get as much content as possible. But the biggest nightmare was after release, because we were naive and thought that, well, later it will be easier because we have so many events, we have so many things. But in fact, no. Later we had to come up with short-term, mid-term, long-term events, other types of events. Now we created R&D department in our company, and we'll be working on new types of features, events, like where we connect different genres together and so on. So we didn't think about this enough. I think as many others, small studios who needs to like scale up and manage the success. So,
Kalle, what we've mentioned many times is sort of the successful mobile games now are as much about live ops as sort of the foundation with which they launch. And live ops is, unless you have a big department doing live ops is a real sort of challenge for people who make games, because it's just not really factored in. I mean, I guess for some studios it is now, but that's really the beating heart of a successful game now has to be the live ops part.
They're just getting more and more important tools to create excitement, engagement, and thus monetization. And that applies to merge games as well. So just one example, recently looked at Merge Mansion's performance, and the Halloween event they just had helped the game reach record high revenues and top crossing positions.
Actually, there's a good point you raised there. We've not really gone into monetization. We sort of skated around it a little bit, but I guess sometimes, you know, in the casual space, that's always sort of the challenge. I think in my view is, it's not, you can always sort of get games that get downloaded and sort of played because they're just enormous, you know, billions of people who play casual games. But the monetization bit is the sort of tricky bit, because these are people who really like to play, and there's a lot of them, and you need monetization obviously because you're a business, but how you balance that is tricky. So can you talk a little bit about how, you know, how's that changed over time, or has it not changed over time? Were you always pretty sure how you wanted to monetize?
So our approach for monetization in merge games is a little bit different from other genres. So we can be a little bit softer than other games because merge gameplay gives you a better retention, and we rely on this audience who is in love with the game, who plays with us for a longer time, and that's why we focus on these players. So we don't force you for short-term monetization, and then later, if you feel like it's the right thing to do, if you want to boost your progress, if you want to get more items and so on, you are free to do this. Of course, events work well in terms of monetization, and that's what makes big difference in any type of game, right? And the longer player stays in your game, the better service you have to provide. You need to come up with variety of events. You need to entertain this audience to monetize, and this is basically how it works. So you just put events, you put long-term monetization features.
Correct. You have a sort of battle pass system as well.
Yeah, like in many other games, you can find battle pass in our game. And so on. We have 2 workers. This is one of the biggest differences between like Merge Dragons, because we have timers. You have to skip timers if you want for gems, and that what boosts as well.
You're saying, of course, we have sort of battle passes. So, I mean, do you think that's sort of something that every game should be having now? Because we have had, a lot of games use it, but some games still don't. So, I mean, do you think battle pass is now just really understood by the whole audience that should be in there because that's an obvious way of monetizing
I think it's not a problem for players to understand how battle passes work. Earlier it was a prerogative for mid-core games, of course, but now you can see more and more of this stuff in casual games, and that's fine. And other trends as well are coming to casual games, and that's interesting to see.
Actually, EverMerge has been around for a while now, over 2 years. So how, I guess you're not a new game anymore. You're sort of getting to that sort of, I don't know, sort of middle level. You think it's going to go for many more years. How do you think about the product now? It's probably not quite, you don't think of it as mature. You still hope there's going to be a lot more sort of growth of users. So how do you sort of match that? Because sometimes you get to this stage with sort of over 2 years in, there's been people who've been playing you since day one. They know how to do it. They just, they want more complicated things, but there's still a lot of new people coming in. And there's a point at which some games get very complicated for new players because they come in and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on there, and they're just like, whoa, this is really complicated. I thought it was a simple merge game. So how do you sort of work at that balance between existing players who really love it and been playing it every day for 2 years and new players who just like, let's try this out?
It's important to keep the right balance for players who just joined the game, because we have plenty of them. But as well, we need to keep in mind that elder players has their own needs and they need to be entertained well. So there is a game design department in our company, and they work hard on any additional feature that will appear in the game to make sure that it will not ruin the FTUE, first time user experience. It will not affect negatively any part of our audience, but we need to feed the elder players as well.
The good thing about free-to-play mobile games is you have all the data about, you can look at all the cohorts and you can sort of see very clearly how the changes that you make impact.
Even some features that we release work for some players well and doesn't for others. And we have to decide, do we leave this in the game as it is, or we go to another iteration of A/B tests and rebalance this feature? So this is a part of our job as well. And with every year, it's more and more complicated because, as you mentioned, product matures, and then you have to double check every aspect of every feature and so on. And market is full of new games, new titles. It's a pleasure to be in this market. We saw many unsuccessful clones, of course, because they just tried to rip off the game with no thinking. But there are some games which looks promising. I'm personally playing some clones of EverMerge and enjoy doing this because, an example, Merge County, they iterate fast on events. They were a little bit more brave and creative in this aspect of the game, and this worked well. So that's one of the approaches, right? Now we have to be faster and so on. We have this R&D department and so on. So there is constant competition, like in other genres. But it's pleasure to see, because when we entered into this genre, there was no genre at all. There was just 1 or 2 games. Few our games and nothing else, just silence. But now we see lots of games, and I believe there is a good future for not only for EverMerge but for new products on the market as well.
Kalle, do you want to take that one on with your looking into your crystal ball? I mean, how do we see sort of Merge? Is Merge? I mean, it's already a very sort of large subsection of casual. Is that gonna grow in a sort of linear way, or is there going to be this sort of as we sort of discussed this, it's going to jump over and become like a key gameplay option for almost every mobile game?
I do think I agree with Sergey that the future definitely looks bright for Merge in general. So there's, as we already discussed, there's new entrants constantly coming to the scene. Some of them finding even their ways to the top charts and sustaining there. And there's also a fair amount of innovation as well. So I For example, I found was it Playticus, the build and battle merge game. I think that was quite interesting. And I think there's some makeover merge games that I've seen in the scene that could be something that we will see more in the future. And as said, like we are seeing merge also in non-merge games. I think that trend is going to continue. And I think one thing that is actually missing in the market is an IP-based merge game. At least I haven't seen any. So it would be very interesting to see, the merge gameplay combined with some interesting IP.
Your prediction will Kalle be right over the next 6 months? Will it be? I'm sure somewhere someone is working frantically on some IP-based thing, because why wouldn't they be? But lovely. Well, thank you very much to Kalle and Sergey as well for their expertise. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your homework is to immediately go and download EverMerge and check it out and see how Sergey and his team have been getting on. And your other homework, if you haven't done it, I'm sure you have already, is to subscribe to the podcast. So we're available as a podcast, audio podcast, and as a video podcast as well. And every episode we are talking to people who are building out this mobile game sector, the largest single sector of the games industry, and still very vibrant, still new. I don't know, it's just the imagination and the sort of the mashups we talk about, the hybridization of what's going on, and these sort of metas and these gameplay elements being sort of put together like little Lego blocks, and these fantastic products being created. So we hope you are enjoying the podcast. Come back next time, and thanks for watching.